Let's get ready to RPG!
RPG! RPG! RPG! RPG! RPG!
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Knights of Last Call here at a late night. So tonight, I wasn't going to stream at all. The reason I wasn't going to stream at all was because our friend Tundulus of Trespasser fame was going to do a stream and talk about some of his ideas, I think, for continuing the development of Trespasser. And I was excited to watch it, and I didn't want to. And of course, he was just doing this on his own channel. But I was like, oh, you know what? Why would I stream and cannibalize that? So many KOLC people want to watch that, and so many of our viewers are patron members. So I said, you know what? I'll just take a break and I'll let Tundulus do his thing. Well, he was sick, so he didn't end up streaming. And well, you know, I was like, well, crap. All right, I guess we'll do something else instead. So here we are. Now, the good news is this is a late night stream. It is not, you know, D&D or Draw Steel or Dagger Heart. So that means there's going to be like 20 people here, which is great. Because again, these late night streams just give me an opportunity to just hang out with folks and not really, you know, be stuck to an agenda. Like when we do our first look, you know, I don't really get to interact with the chat the same way that I get to interact with the chat when we do these kind of streams, which I think is, which is kind of a shame, unfortunately. So yeah, anyways. So what is this about? Well, what it's about is I did a poll recently, and we've been talking for a while about different things that we could do with the channel to, you know, increase community engagement. And one of those things that we like to do is mega games. And of course, Derek, love the Lord of the Rings, love Tolkien, and I really, really love the One Ring from Free League. So my plan is still to run a solo game using the Moria solo rules. Excuse me. I don't know why, but sometimes TMI. Sometimes when I start live streaming, I suddenly get very burpy. Anyways, it was to run a live stream game using a slightly variation of the solo rules and play it here live. Now, other people have done, you know, solo play-alongs on their streams or their channels, but I don't know how many people of them have really done it live and have done it interacting with the chat. However, one thing that we have always, one thing that we've always sort of wondered is, or questioned is, well, how cool would it be for the community to also play in the game that, you know, the Knights of Last Call are playing? Now, to be clear, this has always been a little tricky when we're talking about playing like a community game with a bunch of players, and, you know, my focus is on my players and their agency, and I want them to be the star of the show. And while I appreciate that the community wants to be part of that as well, I don't want to step on my players' toes, and I don't want to step on my community's toes. So I've always been a little hesitant to do that. But when it comes to a solo game, you know, I'm just the player and the GM, and it's just me. So I was like, this seemed to be a perfect opportunity for me to run a mega game. Now, we've had a lot of people who've been interested in the One Ring, and so I was like, oh, that's a cool opportunity for us to run this game for our community, and we could run the One Ring. But we could set it in Moria. We could set it in the same Moria that I'm going to be playing in. And so the events that I do on stream will influence the game, and the game, it will influence what I do on stream. So all that's really, really cool. However, as we like to do here, I was like, well, you know what? If I'm playing the game solo, what if my patrons could play the game solo? One of our biggest hurdles, as you might imagine, when we play these mega games or run these mega games is, you know, GMs and schedules and people getting enough time. And maybe there's people who want to participate, but they don't, it just doesn't work out for them because of time zones or their work schedule or crazy hectic life, or maybe they're just not comfortable, you know, gaming with a bunch of strangers. All those things could be true. So I thought, well, what if we had a way that the community could participate via a solo game or a normal game of the One Ring, and all of that could feed into a community experience of representing the expedition in the year, I don't know, I think it's like 2981. Is it 2981? Of the Third Age of Balin, heading back to Moria, and 2989. That was close. And heading back and seeing if we can win. Of course, historically, the dwarves did not win. They were killed to a man or to a dwarf. But that's the cool thing about role-playing games, man. We can make our own, no fate but what we make. We can make our own history, and we can do our own thing. So that is kind of what I want to do. Now, you might say, well, Derek, I thought you really liked, what about all these other things that you're doing? Well, those things are still going on. Absolutely. It's particularly Wilderfeast. I think Wilderfeast is really awesome, and I still want to do that. However, the reality is Wilderfeast has a lot of problems in that it's fine, but it has a lot of problems for a mega game because there's a lot of changes that I want to make for the game, and that is going to involve a lot more work, and I think it'll be worth it. Not really. Not financially worth it. I think it'll just be worth it, metaphorically, or spiritually, it would be worth it. But the fact of the matter is, it would require a lot of work, including probably building our own Foundry module. And I am totally willing to do that. But I also understand that that's going to take time. And we have a lot of other stuff going on. But the nice thing about the One Ring is, I don't really have any quibbles with the One Ring. I think it's great, and the Foundry module is really good. So it's kind of set lock, stock, and barrel. It's ready for us to go. We just kind of need to, just turn it on, and that's kind of the play. Now, there's a couple of things that we need to figure out. That's about it. And then and then we can start getting things together. Now, I'm still traveling this week. I mean, this is my 1 week that I'm home basically this entire month. So some of this stuff is going to have to wait till I'm, back home, because next week I'm traveling, and then the week after that I'm traveling. So I'm going to be pretty much in and out here throughout. And but I wanted to sort of maybe start to get some hype going, to get some people interested, and just talk about some of the basic concepts or ideas that I have for running this game. And some of the things that we need to fix or figure out. So we'll go over to the PDF browser, and we'll bring up the whiteboard, and we'll just quickly sketch this stuff out. I don't even know if this is going to be that long of a stream. I just kind of wanted to hang out and talk to y'all. And here we are. Bring up the whiteboard. Do not care about all these pop-ups. It's crazy. All right. There we go. Famous last words. This is very true. So, in a One Ring game, obviously, you traditionally in the One Ring, your characters go on an adventure, which typically lasts between 1 to 3 sessions. It can last longer than that, but I would I'd say 2 to 3 sessions is probably more normal. After which, your characters have a fellowship phase. So one of the key things that is interesting about this game is it's more realistic, and it's also more in line with the pacing of the Lord of the Rings, which is to say, in real life, people would go on these, like in D&D campaigns, it's very common for people to go from level 1 to 20 in a month, like in game times. Number one, that's just not how real life works, but also number two, that's definitely not how Lord of the Rings works. So, an adventure where the characters go and they, they travel and they do something and they accomplish something, that could last anywhere from 1 to 2 weeks. And then the fellowship phase represents them returning after that adventure and maybe spending, 4 to 8 weeks, recovering and convalescing and all this other stuff. It's very much like, the olden days where it's like, someone would get, sick for a whole season. Like I remember like, just like when you read about like the founding fathers and stuff like that, it's like, well, he battled an illness for 1778. It's like, they were just sick for that entire year. Anyways, so you go on your first adventure, and then you go on another adventure at some point. Now, none of this is like written in stone, but then you have another fellowship phase, and I'll discuss this in a second. Then you go on a third adventure, and when the third adventure is over, you have a special fellowship. It's still a fellowship phase, but it's a special fellowship phase. It is called Yule. So what that means is basically it's Christmas time. It's the winter time. And number one, it means that a year has passed. And number two, while a normal fellowship phase might last like 4 to 8 weeks, Yule can last, 2 to 3 months. And in fact, during Yule, it is presumed that the characters, break up, go back home, visit with friends and family. They kind of, touch base with the people and the lives in their, the people in their lives and stuff like that. And then everyone ages a year, and then rinse, repeat. Now, Moria specifically, the solo rules has a special rule which basically says that there is no Yule. There's no Christmas in Moria. Now, this pattern of play obviously runs into certain issues when we start talking about a solo game, okay, or a mega game with a normal game of the One Ring but played as a mega game, because we do everything in one session increments, right? So an adventure is never going to be 2 sessions or 3 sessions. It's going to be 1 session. Everything is 1 session, including with the solo play. So we need to kind of restructure and consider that. The second thing is that the normal game of the One Ring has this idea of this fellowship pool, which you can use and can spend to sort of distribute hope amongst your fellowship amongst your company as you travel. However, the solo game admits that this is kind of wonky, because in a solo game, you don't know how long a session is going to be. It could just be 5 minutes, and so if you get 3 hope or whatever like that, it's kind of problematic. And so instead, the solo game kind of gives this alternative way to sort of regain and regenerate hope through fellowship. That, again, structurally, I have some ideas, and it's tied into some of the ideas that I had from Wilderfeast, but I think it'll be kind of interesting. It's kind of cool. So the first is, let me see what the chat's saying here. Wait, you can't just spend 2 XP to learn a language overnight like the rest of us can. No, you can't. If you're doing Balin's expedition, will you keep it canon and Dorfy so everyone has fun and loses? We sort of. I mean, yes, it's Balin's expedition, but I have never, ever considered myself a slave to the canon in any capacity whatsoever. We're here to tell our story, not Tolkien's story. And Tolkien, by the way, very famously changed his mind all the time. There are many instances, there's several instances where, if you know the Tolkien lore, there's like 5 or 6 different versions of how things played out. And so, if you're technically, what you read is not even necessarily canon. There's several different versions of the official canon. So Cinnabot's asking a question. So how long do you envision fellowship phases in terms of sessions? So that is the most important question. And so my thought process here is a little bit different, which is, in the context of Moria, specifically, obviously Moria is huge. It's literally a city. It has 7 levels above. It has 7 deeps below. It stretches, 60 or 80 miles east to west. It's 10 or more miles up and down, or 10 or more miles left and right. So you're talking about, and when you include the verticality element to it, I don't even know. Many, 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 many thousands and thousands of square miles. And the dwarves live there since the first age. Before the first age of they lived there during the year of the trees. So that was during Vailian years. So they have been there for 6,000 years. And yes, it has been at this point in history abandoned for I think close to 1,000 years. The dwarves were originally driven out by. The dwarves were driven out in 1981, and it is now 2989. So, almost 1,000 years. But again, it has been inhabited for thousands and thousands of years before that. So, needless to say, it's a big place. So my idea is that instead of an adventure being 1 to 3 session representing 1 to 2 weeks, what I'll probably do is something like where a week, like an actual week, like a real week, is roughly equivalent to 1 month in game time. And what I'll probably do is that during the course of this 1 real life week, you will get the option or the availability to do sort of 1 fellowship phase action. However, what I want to do, or what I want to take into this consideration, is normally in the game, the way that you kind of get back hope is by at the start of every session. I don't love this rule, by the way, but it's totally fine. It's just kind of like, it depends on what your session's like. But at the beginning of a session, your entire group gets something like 3 to 4 fellowship. And depending on your patron. And then during the course of the session, you can spend this out of your fellowship to restore hope to different party members. And if you're smart, you'll do this every single session. But really, you use up all of it every single session. But and again, in a solo session, it doesn't really make much sense, because you would just you could be like, yeah, I'm playing a solo session. Okay, I get 4 fellowship. Okay, I use all 4 fellowship. I give myself 4 hope. So one of the things that I kind of want to do instead, one of the things that we've noticed with these community games, especially if people are going to be playing solo, is how do we tie that together? How do we make this part of a communal action? And so one of the things that's become really popular in our other mega games is our Discord, and treating the Discord and treating its channels like part of the game. And so one of the things that I kind of want to play around with here, and Strat and I have already sort of played around with this idea for using a bot for this, is as a player, as you spend time in Discord, chatting with the other players, if you spend time, writing up a log, we'll probably have like the Book of Marsable log book, right? Doing those actions will basically be equivalent to spending fellowship, and that will sort of restore your character's hope. Because my general idea here is I want people to be able to play more or less, kind of not necessarily as often as they want. I do want there to be a limit, but rather than say, well, you can only play, once or twice a week, rather I'd like it to be sort of a diminishing return, where if you play that much, your character is going to, probably get really beat up accumulate a lot of fatigue, accumulate a lot of hope, lose a lot of hope, accumulate a lot of shadow, and then your character will basically need to wait until next week to adventure and to level and to play. And originally, I was thinking of just making it like a solo game, and then I was thinking, originally I was thinking of just making it a regular, like a rules as written, one GM, 3 to 4, 5 players. But now I kind of like the idea of doing it both ways, and sort of using it in that capacity and letting people now as an example. Now I don't necessarily want to like put fences around this, but like in our Northern Reaches game, which is Pathfinder 2, obviously the default session is, 1 GM and, 4 to 5 PCs or whatever. That's the default. But we also have these special raids, which used to be very, very special. Now they're still modestly special. I would still, before they were mythic rare, now they're just rare, right? So this is the common. This is in Northern Reaches. So raids are rare, right? Where you might have 1 GM and 12 PCs or something like that. Well, so what I want to do for Moria is I kind of want the default, the common thing to be the solo game. And rather than having so a and then instead of being rare, I want just the group games to be uncommon. And I'm not going to put like a limitation on them. I'm just simply acknowledging the fact that, Pathfinder 2 is a very popular game, and we have like 50 or 60 or 70 people playing, and we might have 20 or 30 GMs, and, there's going to be a lot of opportunities for you to get a game. But, if we do a one-ring game, there might only be 15 or 20 players. So you're not going to be able to find group games at the pace that you might be able to find them in another game. One of my expectations in Dragonbane or Pathfinder 2 mega games is hopefully that everyone can play at least in one session a week. Now we have some people who play in 2 or 3 sessions a week, but if we can't get people to be, if someone wants to play and they can't even play once a week, I'm kind of like, okay, we have a problem. We have scheduling problems. That is not going to be my assumption for this game. So in this game, I'm going to basically assume that, if you get into a group game, great. If you get into 2 group games, great. But if someone's like, hey, I really wanted to play with, a 1 GM and 5 players, and there wasn't any opportunity for me this week, I'm not going to treat that as like, a problem of a failure point. Again, it's like great to do, want to encourage it, want to embrace it, but I don't necessarily want to like focus as much the game around that, if that makes any sense. Because you will have access, to this solo game. So each dwarf PC, that's you're going to have your little crew, you're going to have your retinue of dwarves. Now there is some things here to be I don't want to say debated, but there are some things here that we could kind of play around with, because like in the solo game, right, you have your dwarf PC, and then you have this crew of dwarven NPC allies. And they're like, they are your allies. Because obviously it's a solo game. So like one idea, I'm just playing around here, nothing's written in stone. One idea I have is, what if the community shared a pool of NPC allies? So like if there's like Helgar, right, the dwarven warrior princess, she might be an ally that anybody can take with them on an expedition. And you may have played with her, and I may have played with her. But if she's playing with her and Helgar dies in her game, Helgar's dead for all of us, right? And because like one of the things that I always talk about with these mega games is I want us to be able to build a community, and I want us to have these moments and these experiences as a community, right? So, I like this idea that you may have, it's instead of, because with solo games in particular. Now, granted, this can even happen with our group games. This can happen where people are normally, where people are playing with each other, but people can get into silos, and you may not, really care what's happening to another group and to another area. But I like this idea that maybe you really like Helgar, or maybe you've played with Helgar as part of your crew, and now she's dead, and so I'm not saying like you're crying yourself to sleep, but you're like, oh man, that does affect me. That is something that is affecting me. And so I like this idea, I think, of, kind of sharing this pool of NPC allies, because I think it'll make it a little bit. Now, yes, like there's something to be said about building up your own crew and, getting all this other stuff, but that's very selfish. That's very solo oriented. I like the idea of it being, more of a community thing. It's also possible that what we could do here is, we could split the difference, right? So like there might be like the pool of NPC allies, and then you as a PC, right? You might have your personal retainers. Now I believe in the solo game, I think you can have up to like 12 people or something in your pool. Of eventually, when you have your allies. Let me see if I can find it here. Gathering allies. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. You can have up to 12 allies. Now that doesn't necessarily mean that you bring all 12 allies. So instead of 12, maybe it's something that you have to earn into, right? Like maybe every dwarf starts with one personal ally, right? That's your personal ally. Yeah. Beowulf. That's a great comparison. So in Ars Magica, right, the PC is, the wizard, right? But then you also have like your companion, right, which is sort of like your personal bodyguard, your best friend. And then you have the grogs, which are just like, the men. They're not necessarily worthless, but they are the red shirts. They're very, very secondary characters. And it's a very troop play oriented game. So it's very much, I think, is kind of the vibe I'm going for there, exactly, which is to say you'll have your PC, right, this sort of dwarven adventurer, or maybe you're maybe you're a Dunedain ranger who struck up a friendship with the dwarves of the Blue Mountain, and when word came of Balin's expedition to cleanse out the darkness and the shadow and to do battle against orcs, you felt that in your heart of hearts that you needed to go help the dwarves fight the shadow. You ventured in there with. We talked about this before, but I am going to allow non-dwarves into the game, but the idea being that they will be rare and potentially but they may be somewhat limited in some of the advantages, and there's going to be an uphill battle. No, unfortunately, it's only going to be available to the Tolkien races. So, and I'm still really on the fence about allowing elves. We'll see. The only thing I can say about elves is that in the lore, Balin obviously fought in the Battle of the Five Armies, and so the Sylvan elves of the Woodland Realm, those are Thranduil's people, the elves from Mirkwood, right? There's sort of a kinship there, right? They fought together against the army of wargs and orcs at the Battle of the Five Armies. So there's kind of like a kinship there. In general, obviously the dwarves and the elves, they have their significant disagreements. But I like to think that the Battle of Five Armies, especially with those woodland elves, may have soothed over some things, especially for people who are from Erebor, right? Like Balin and presumably a good chunk of dwarves are going to be from, from Erebor. Anyways, but I like this idea that yeah, you might have a handful of very close personal allies that are sort of yours, but then there'll be this communal pool of NPC allies that you can sort of that you can sort of loan, you can loan out. And I think that's a really a neat option. So yeah, it's like a bit of a troop play as well. And Selden says, have NPCs tied to clocks or downtime resource outputs. Well, this, in the name of getting the game going, I don't know how complicated, I want to make it. I don't know how much I want to, if I want to create this whole elaborate system of intricate, which is what I normally do during these mega games, right? I create these very, because, well, to be clear, to be completely honest with you, one of the reasons why I create a complicated mechanical driven downtime system for most of our mega games is because I want to give people something to do during the rest of the week when they aren't playing the game, right? Like, let's say that you're playing, Dragon Tide or you're playing Northern Reaches. You might only be in one session, maybe two sessions that week. Well, that's only 6 hours. What if you want to, do something on Wednesday or Thursday? So I've always tried to create some complexity and some things for you to do during the middle of the week when you're not actually playing Pathfinder 2. And this game kind of removes some of that pressure, because if you really want to play and you don't have a session scheduled, or there's none to be had, or it's, whatever, the middle of the night, you can just go solo, right? You could just grab your crew, grab some allies, find a mission from the mission board, or randomly generate one using some of the Oracle tables, and then go and, do the solo rules. And, you'll make a Discord, probably like a forum post representing your expedition. We have a bot that helps us run and manage some of our PB, play-by-post games. We can maybe tweak a bot real quick to make it more, Lord of the Rings friendly. But, and then you follow the solo rules, and we trust you, and there could be some boundaries on what's acceptable or not. I don't want to sit there and manually check every single person's results of their game, but at a certain fundamental level, we'll set some guidelines and about how much you can actually accomplish. If someone's like, yeah, I had a solo session on Monday and I recovered the axe of Durin, and then on Tuesday I had a solo session and I killed the Balrog, and then on Wednesday I marched to Rivendell and I laid siege to the, it's like, okay, what's going on in your solo game? we gotta keep you checked there, for sure. So all in all, we'll put some limitations on it so that people don't, overdo it, I suppose would be the term. But in general, if we plan on doing a 1 week is a month of game time, then we can play for 12 weeks, and that would be a year of play. And that would be kind of a cool way to sort of, and even though in the solo game they don't have Yule, we could still have a version of Yule, right? So that'll be instead of our season, it'll be our year. Now, historically, Balin's colony in Moria lasted 5 years. So, here's to us. But this is something that I've thought about doing anyways. I don't know how successful this will be or if people will actually be playing it. But one idea that I've had is this idea of we play for 12 weeks, and then we take a break. We take 4 weeks off or something like that. Literally and figurative, literally in the game representing a time off, and then figuratively, outside of the game representing a time off. And then we would do year 2 of the expedition. And, that's a month off that we can kind of tweak some things and change some things and, go back to it. And that way that's rather than right now we have this thing where it's we play for 6 to 8 months in a row. And I think people get really burned out sometimes. And then we take this really long period off and we kind of reset everything, which we kind of have to do because it's sort of this natural progression of, D20 based games where it's like you get really, really high level and suddenly you're really powerful. And what else are you going to do? Or if you're playing Dragonbane, our Dragonbane season was very abbreviated. I think our Dragonbane season might have been 12 weeks. Now that I think about it, I think it was 12 weeks. And we had plenty of people who had 18 skills well before the end of the season. So, and that's max, that's as high as you can get. That means that on a D20 roll, you succeed 90% of the time, right? 90% of the time. Now that's not a problem for Dragonbane, but it certainly limits, right, the upper echelons of what is capable and what is possible with the game. Now, the good news is that in the One Ring, even raw, excuse me, even raw, you get my brain is I have failed you. You get to only spend your experience points during the fellowship phase. And during the fellowship phase, here we go. This is what I was looking for. This table. The good news is this is the XP progression chart. So you can see that to get to the very highest ranks of the game, to get to a 4 or a 5 or whatever. By the way, these are not cumulative costs, right? They're resetting costs. So you need 4, and then you would technically need 12, and then you would need 24, right? And then you would need, you need 44, and then you need 70, and then you need 100, right? So you need 100 XP to take a skill from 0 to the max, which is 6. So it slows down, right? It's the opposite. It's just like old school D&D. But if you think about Pathfinder 2, to go from first level to second level is 1,000 experience points. To go from 19th level to 20th level is 1,000 experience points. But here's the deal. You don't get more XP in the One Ring as you quote unquote get higher level. There is no higher level. So long story short, it means that you're typically only going to get a handful of adventure points and skill points per session, or maybe even per week. So this means that realistically, we would have to play for, I'm going to guess, a year or more, and you'd have to be playing fairly continuously for a character to really get to the max rank in the game. And that's fine. Because look, I'm not going to lie to you. Secretly. Now, Derek is a Lord of the Rings fan. But as I said before, canon is cool. I like Lord of the Rings canon. But if I want to read Lord of the Rings canon, I can go read the Silmarillion. I can go read the Lord of the Rings. I can go read the histories of Middle-earth. What I like about role-playing games is we get to tell new stories. Stories that no one ever read before. The stories that no one ever saw before because we were creating them. Now, that being said, do I, Derek, the Tolkien nerd, the purist, the Tolkien, wannabe PhD Tolkien and professor, do I think it would be really awesome if after many years in-game of play, which would still represent many, 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 many months of gaming play. Do I think it would be pretty fucking awesome if a group of dwarves uncovered the ancient treasures of Khazad-Dum, found the dragon helm of Forchal, found the axe of Durin, found some other bullshit item that we made up, and, I don't know, killed the Balrog? Do I think that would be awesome? Yes. Yes, I do think that would be awesome. Now, would they kill the Balrog? I don't know. I don't know if that thing can actually be defeated, like, mechanically. But all I know is, I don't care. Well, no, the Balrog can't die because he's got to be fought by Gandalf. No, he doesn't. That was the book. That was the movie. Who cares about that? We're telling our story. In fact, our story's being told 30 or more years or something, 20 years or something before the Fellowship of the Ring. So, it doesn't matter. So I like that potential. So while I don't want to, I'm not worried about people like scaling to infinity. I also think that it would be cool if, people got strong and people got, powerful. I think that's pretty cool. Although that being said, while rolling more dice is nice, what is cool about this game is that, at level 1, well, sorry, you don't have level. At PC generation, your character might have a strength score of 6. Let's say you're more of a warrior type character. And that means that the TN for all of your strength-based checks is 14. Now, that pretty much doesn't change throughout the entire course of the game. You might take one of the Valor updates that I think lowers it by 1, right? But it's 14. And you're rolling a D12, and you're adding, let's say you have 3 ranks. So you're adding 3d6. Well, you can easily see here that on average, right, this is going to crush that DC. So already at 3 ranks, you're doing pretty well at crushing the DC. And by the way, it's very easy. In fact, most characters, all starting characters have at least a couple of skills that they have 3 ranks in. So if someone does go to 4 ranks or 5 ranks or 6 ranks, at a certain point, since the TNs don't scale, that's your TN. Getting a bunch more ranks doesn't really matter as much, And I think that's what's important, Nate, so I don't want to, I don't want to poo-poo solo games, but Nate, I'm completely in agreement with you. Basically, in Northern Reaches, we had regular sessions, and then we had the very special raid sessions. Now, in Northern Reaches, the raid sessions were very rare, but that was where the biggest and coolest and most awesomest things could be found and uncovered. In this version of the game, raids are equivalent to the group sessions. Now, they're not as rare; they're probably just uncommon. But I still think that anything that's like, truly meaningful and special should really happen there. So, yeah, again. Although I will point out that since now while future canon is not to be while future canon can be completely ignored, I will point out that this book has no statistics for Azog because in the books, Azog was killed. In the movie, the Hobbit movie, the battle where Azog gets his arm cut off and he gets pulled back. Yeah, in the actual book, he gets killed. So. Speaking of static TNs, are you going to fiddle with Parry? No. Number one, there's nothing wrong with Parry. It just bothers me from a sensibility standpoint because everything else in the game is so, fluid and dynamic. Secondly, if you're playing online, in Foundry and stuff, it's not that big of a deal. It's a lot easier. So it's not as much of an issue. That's what I'm basically getting to in when you're playing online. It's not even really an issue in real game either. It is admittedly the one inelegant part of the game that I don't like because it's just you don't change it to anything else. No, you don't necessarily always need a cool treasure encounter for every raid. Again, because not every group session is going to be a super named important session. Sometimes group sessions are just, hey, there's a bunch of people free and they want to, they want to play together and the GM can roll on the random table, or maybe they built a really cool adventure location within Moria and we can go explore it and do all that other stuff. So yeah, it's not that big of a deal. It doesn't have to be this a big moment. It could be, but it doesn't have to be. And I think that's what's important. What was I looking at here? It's chewing tinfoil. I don't know what that means. So this gets to the question of like how much of a downtime action, or how much of a downtime process or procedure do we want to have? My instinct tells me it would be pretty cool if you could mine and craft mithril. I mean, that's one of the big reasons that the players want to do that. So that's one of those things where it's like I kind of have to like sort of figure out what how that is going to work, and how that's going to be structured. But yeah, Cinnabos, I think that'd be pretty cool, and I think that would be pretty neat. But in general, I'm planning on sort of kind of taking if you watched my what was it called? If you watched my Quest for the Frozen Flame, I used a system of resources in that game that represented sort of the health of the Broken Tusk Mammoth tribe. And it's kind of the same thing here. Like I kind of want to have like one resource that it's just a very easy way to sort of represent things. So like one might be like, right, like the expedition strength, right? Names pending, which is just an overall effort of like, how many dwarves do you have, right? And this can be raised by, rescuing dwarves, recruiting new dwarves, building infrastructure and new, new colonies, and basically like the more successful you are, the more dwarves will come and maybe start to try to live here and join the fight. And so, that's a because to be clear too, I want to give I want there to be an opportunity for people to do more than just like kill orcs. Like it'd be cool if like maybe as a solo session or as a group session, your group goes and travels and meets with a group of dwarves and tries to convince them of the worthiness of your cause in Moria, and asks them to send a contingent to retake the dwarves' ancestral homeland, or what I mean. Like I think that's really cool. But anyways, and obviously if people die or there's food shortages and stuff like that, right, expedition strength could go down, and to the point where basically if it gets to 0, you have kind of lost, because it means that your people have been sort of killed off. Then there's also this idea of territory, which is a representation. Now again, we could do this through a map, but there really isn't a map of Moria. It's so big and it's so complicated. So it might be easier to represent this with numbers rather than an actual map. So it might be easier to represent this through a series of either numbers or like statuses, right? So like historically, there are 7 levels, and then there are 7 deeps. And then everything is taken from the pace of the first level, and that's vertical. And so right off the rip, you have 14 different levels, and then it's a bit more, and then you might have Eastern, Central, and Western, right? So already like this, you have 14 levels times 3 zones. So you already have 42 different kind of zones or areas. And so you might have each of those areas have a status, right? So that status might be like, controlled, or like Blades in the Dark, right? Like stronghold, weak hold, dangerous, or what I mean, like orcs. I don't know. I'm just trying to think of like in terms of like a really easy, simple sheet or board that you could look at and sort of get a sense for, and there might even be a status of unknown, right? As people don't know what's in that area or what's that region. I think one of the cool options for a solo game is to somebody to go scout, just to learn more about where things are and what dangers or what opportunities exist out there in Moria. So there's this idea of representing how much of the kingdom that you have. Obviously, there is this idea of the Eye of Sauron. Now that's from the core game, which is normally tracked at an individual level. But this idea that how aware or how present is the force of these creatures, or of the of Sauron, of the one, and his focus on you. Now that's a little bit more generic because technically in Moria there's different factions of orcs, and I think that could be a fun thing to do here. So this could even kind of come down to this idea of faction, orc factions and stuff like that. And then of course there's the kind of, because it's on a different plane than Sauron, but there's this idea of of course the shadow and flame, the shadow and flame tracking game, right? So it's like, how close are you to pissing off the Balrog? And obviously this is sort of like the nuclear option because quite frankly, this is what wiped out everybody the last time, right? So this is one of those things where it's like you need to be very mindful of this and and all this other stuff. And then again, this is sort of a generic attempt of this. We could also in PCs have that they track their hope and they track their fear. I'm sorry, not hope and fear. They track their hope and shadow. We got Daggerhearted there for a second. And so there could be like this idea of a community hope and fear, maybe more like a morale, right? As well. And again, that could be that if the community morale goes to zero, the game is over, right? The dwarves weren't killed, but they lost hope, right? The darkness, the shadow of Khazad-Dum, the dread, the despair became too much for the community. And again, this is giving other options for players to do stuff other than just kill orcs, right? There might be an important mission to recover a lost dwarven relic. It doesn't do anything. It's not a magical relic, but it's just important to your people. It might be, like maybe there's an expedition to travel to the Zirak Ziggle, right, which is the spire, Durin Spire. It's the thing that the people fought at, the Gandalf and Balrog fought at in the movie. And just going there could be a moment of hope for your community and for your people. So I want there to be other angles than just fighting orcs, because it's, number one, I think the game is bigger than that, and number two, the game it's Lord of the Rings. It's not just about killing orcs, and I'm really inspired from this by the book. Now this wasn't in the movie, but in the book, after they leave Moria, right? Gandalf. I mean, number one, they went into Moria. They discover that everyone's dead. They go to the Chamber of Marzabul. They discover the book. They learn that Balin is dead. That Nori and Owen are dead. That the dwarves were wiped out. And there's a Balrog. And then Gandalf gets killed, right? And they leave, and they're being chased, by the orcs, from Moria, and they are on the run. And even then, in the books, Gimli basically is like, Frodo, you have to come with me. We have to go to the Mirror. We have to go look into the Mirror. We have to stand at Durin's Stone. And this is basically one of, if not one, arguably one of, if not the holiest spaces for dwarven people, certainly for Gimli's people, the Longbeards, because it's the place where Durin looked into the lake. He saw the reflection of 7 stars above his head, and he took that as a sign of his divine providence, that he was the rightful king of the 7 clans of the dwarves, and that this is where he should build his home. And he turned around and he started digging. Anyways, but even despite all those things that just happened to him, Gimli was like, we need to do this. So this is and I should also point out that in the novel, actually visiting that stone is how Balin got killed originally. He went down there. He got shot with like a poisoned, orc arrow, and the dwarves, took him back into Moria, but he didn't recover from his wounds, and he died. And that's why they buried him. But that happened like a year or more before the rest of the dwarves got killed. Drums in the Deep, which is why they had time to be able to build him a tomb and stuff like that. Anyways, my point is that I do like leaning into not just this idea of killing orcs, but this idea of yes, London, of awe and wonder, of the splendor of the ages of the dwarves past. So I do want there to be this sense of these community things. And then when you go out on an adventure, whether it's as a solo player or it's as a group, ultimately what I want you to be able to do is decide which of these resources you may have affected, right? Either positively or negatively. And, I think that's how we can tie the community together. We can do it through like the fellowship actions, but we can also do it from the communal actions in that respect. And yeah, so that's kind of the gist of it. Basically, I mean, there's a couple more parts to it other than that, but I mean that's basically kind of the element. You don't remember that from the movies? Well, it's all right. Now, when it comes to like in Dragontide, we had this concept of like these resources. Now, I like that system, but like these were like things that you could spend, that you could acquire. And, so like we had this idea of supplies, right? So like we use this as an abstract resource to represent, food, fuel, medicine, timber, tools. So this is like an option that we could have so that like when you go out on expeditions, you might be acquiring supplies or losing supplies, and the group needs supplies. We also know that there's treasure. I mean, this is also part of the reason that the dwarves came to Moria. Now, while it's true that a lot of the wealth of Moria was looted over the centuries, there's still a lot of treasure laying in the the depths of Moria. And separate from treasure is this idea of mithril. And this might be something that you find, but it also might be something that, again, that you mine or that you create. And this idea of lore and maybe like glory or renown, how famous you are as a dwarf. So there's a couple different ideas that we could steal from our other games as well. But ultimately, I just want there to be a nice, simple way that as a GM or as a player, you can put together a game session, you can run it, and at the end, you can make a determination about what resources you may have gained, maybe what resources you lost. Did you piss off the orcs? Maybe something. There was a sign. You found some deep sign of the Balrog. And some of this and all that. This is all part of the solo game, which has these like tables. I know that in the Moria solo rules, when you roll on I think it's the ill fortune table, there's like a special, or maybe it's even in the core game, but like there's a special thing that you have to roll like badly, like two times in a row or something like that, to potentially have a problem with the with the Balrog. But yeah. Anyways, and I think this is it. I'm not trying to overcomplicate it. I want it to be easy for people to get into. I want it to be more of a especially for the solo game, I want it to be more of a journaling exercise. Obviously, people are going to quote unquote play the game, like I said, in Discord using our bots, to make their dice rolls and stuff like that. but I would encourage people when I talked to before about like, so how do you get your hope back? Well, normally in the game, you would just spend your fellowship points. But what I'm suggesting is that after you do an expedition, like, you'd be in Discord, you'd be, typing in Discord. You're not necessarily writing a novel. You're just, typing away, playing the game, making notes about what you're doing and how you're doing it. This is actually where I could probably use some help from some of the people who in the Patreon who know more about solo journaling games and have had more experience with it than me. But then when you're done with that session, one of the options that you're going to have the ability to do now in Northern Reaches, we called these the very very aptly named AARs, which was the after action reports, and they were about as well written and intriguing to read as you can imagine. So instead, what I'm going to encourage or challenge, but I'm not going to require, but I'm going to encourage or challenge people to do is, you'll have your forum post where, you're rolling your bot dice rolls and, just typing like what your character, was doing the same way that you would be doing if you were journaling it. But what I will encourage people to do is, as a way of restoring your character's hope after one of those expeditions, is to write up what happened in your solo session in the form of an entry into the Book of Marzabul. So the Book of Marzabul is that big, thick, huge, heavy book that, Gandalf reads and, ends with, they are coming, drums in the deep. But it was basically a written log. It was a log book, essentially, of the history of the dwarves who had come here to Moria. In fact, the Chamber of Marzabul is basically their hall of records. And, this is an opportunity for you as a player and as a participant in the community to, just stretch your wings a little bit and, hopefully not, just throw it into Chat GPT, but actually, try to come up with something that you can be proud of. It doesn't have to be like a short story, but I think that, an opportunity for you to write a couple of paragraphs about what your solo adventure did and write it in a way that I think it'll be more fun and interesting for people to read it than reading some boring cut and dry after action report, but to instead write it as if it was being a log entry into the history of the dwarves. And, from a community aspect, I love the idea. This is the type of thing, by the way, that old Derek would love to do, but sadly, new poor Derek has somewhat more limited options. But, if we ran this game, say, for a whole year or 2 years, this is the type of thing where I would love to take these log entries and actually get them put into a book and printed, not necessarily something super grand, but more like a POD style, and allow and give them out to people who participate in the game. And, you could have our version of the Book of Marzabul, right? And it would have our stories and what happened in our, community game. And those kind of concepts and ideas are why I like mega games and why I do what I do and why I like role-playing games. I like creating stories and sharing stories and building and creating these artifacts and having these things that you can look back on and go like, wow. It's one of the reasons why I love mapping so much in role-playing games, because long after that game has come and gone, I will go into an old folder or an old folder, an old binder, and I will find a map from some game from 20 years ago and be like, wow, like, and it all comes flooding back, and it's like an artifact. It's a living testament. One of the things that I unfortunately lament about modern day VTTs and stuff is how throwaway everything is. You play in someone's VTT or whatever, they use some drawing tools, they sketch it out, and then no one records anything, and then when they're done, they delete it or they erase it, and then it's like it never it never existed. So I like the idea of there being a written record for this. And in a weird way, the entire process of this game is just a long con to get us to sort of write our own story. But instead of just writing it however we want, we write it, with dice rolls and GMs and oracle tables pushing us and pulling us in strange and weird directions. So what's up, Jackal? So yeah, that's that's basically, I think, about the gist of it. And Nate says, I know you like custom tables. Scouting could reveal or write custom tables for the different areas from a set of options. Nate, I love it. I think that's awesome. Yes, 100%. I think that's great, Nate. Let people know what opportunities are in an area, what risks are in an area, or like you said, maybe even allow someone to, who succeeds to be like, I've done it. I found a vein of mithril, and you get the ability to add that tag or whatever to that region or to that area. That's very cool. I think that's really neat. And obviously, too, Moria is such a huge space that there's pretty much infinite room for a GM to more or less kind of add whatever they really want. Obviously, there's probably a couple of limitations, but other than that, you're kind of free to do whatever you want to do, which I think is neat. And yeah. And again, unlike Wilder Feast, which I think, again, require a lot of work just to develop and build the infrastructure and maybe create a new foundry, and there's a little bit more complication to it. The One Ring is pretty much, there's not a whole lot of things I need to change about it. The only thing I really need to change about it, like I said, is how you reacquire hope, because the fellowship mechanic doesn't really work in a mega game as written. And even the solo rules of Moria have sort of a sidebar that says something about like, the fellowship point refreshes don't really make as much sense in a solo game, So we'll go from that. So will you open the whole city to play? I don't know really what that means, but yes. Obviously, I would expect for, GMs and players who are playing solo, if you're going from somewhere that's far away, or that is far away, then, you need to journey there, and there is still very much the journey rules, and, it could potentially be very devastating to you just to try to travel that far through the dark of Moria, because, well, traveling through Moria is not to be taken lightly. So it's very easy to acquire a lot of fatigue and. Oh, sorry. Will quests be assigned and so limited to a path or region? No. No. I don't want. Because then who's running that? Nobody. Like, for the most part, I think players will just be able to roll on a random table that will probably have up, or encourage you to make up your own thing, basically. More or less. The solo rules have a whole big mission objective random table that will probably kind of, rely on. But I'm totally fine with, players and GMs just rolling that randomly before they go out on an adventure, or, and, also too, it is possible that given people taking certain actions that we might, update and change those mission objectives, but yeah, they will not be assigned in that respect. But I think it's important to note that are these solo rules in the Moria book? They are. And they were written by Sean Tompkin, who did Iron Sworn, which is many people hold up to be the kind of the gold standard of solo games. But the solo play rules in Moria start on page 189, and I think it goes to page 225. So it's like a 37-page. It's almost like a 37-page supplement within the Moria book, just for running, the solo game. So it's a very detailed set of rules. But well, the other thing too, which I think is important to note, is that Well, it isn't. It's not necessarily. It's not like it's not like a military. It's not like a military expedition, right? But in the Lord of the Rings, in the One Ring game, most of the time you are being given an assignment, from your patron, and obviously the default patron in this case is going to be Balin. But because there's multiple, because we might have multiple players involved, it's possible that we might have different patrons. You could choose a different patron to send you on a mission. But in the narrative, the players might be picking the patron, but in the narrative, right, the patron is kind of sending you out on a mission. And again, it's not like a military per se, but no one's going to Moria and just being like, I'm here on my own free will. I'm going to go sandbox, heck, dungeon crawl Moria. That's not how this works. You are part of this expedition. You are, you're kind of part of the chain of command. You may have some of your own selfish interests, but I would argue that in Moria, sorry, not Moria, in the One Ring, that's actually a strike against you, right? Like one of the things that's going to happen to you, especially as a dwarf, as you journey. So there are the four main ways that you can acquire shadow. Actually, let me rephrase that. The 4 ways that you can acquire shadow points in the One Ring are through dread and despair, sorcery, misdeeds, where you like deliberately do something that is kind of shitty, and greed. And so, I would argue that, like, so as a dwarf, if you are in Moria, you are there to restore the greatness of your people. But as a dwarf, it's, that's something that maybe you struggle with a little bit, is the greedy part. And so finding treasure in the One Ring, this is like true of the entire game, not just Moria, but the entire game. Finding treasure in the One Ring can be very dangerous because greed is a source of shadow. And one of the ways that your character can fall to the shadow is by getting too much treasure. And so that might represent your PC becoming, now one person's PC might be falling to the shadow because of the darkness that they're seeing, because of the battles, because of the allies' lives that they're seeing lost, because of seeing all the great works of their people that have been despoiled over the centuries. Maybe they have too close of an encounter with even just a hint of the Balrog. Because remember, the dwarves don't even necessarily know what the Balrog is. They just call Durin's Bane. They just know there's an evil, right, that lies in the depths of Khazad-Dum. So one person's character could be overwhelmed by that, but another person may lose their dwarf to greed, and to the allure of treasure and riches, and as they call it, dragon sickness. And that's another way that your character can lose. So one of the things that I think Tolkien tried to impress, because remember, he wrote these after his experiences in World War I, is that it's not easy, to do the right thing. And that even the best of men and women, right, deal with darkness and have to battle their demons. And no one makes it out unscathed, right? And I think that's that's arguably the reason for the inclusion of the Scouring of the Shire in the novel, which was obviously missing from the movies, is this idea that Tolkien wanted to point out that, like, there is no going home again. That even the Shire, this pastoral, idyllic, utopian sort of English countryside, paradise, was affected because of the actions of the War of the Ring and the evil that was present in the world. So no one is safe. Nowhere is safe. And, even the main character of the novels, arguably, Frodo, kind of loses and isn't able to go home again. He has to basically kind of peace out, because being in the world is just too painful for him. And they feel so bad for him, they let him go to into the west, to try to live out the rest of his days, such as they are, in some degree of peace and rest. So, anyways, it's important to realize that when you play the One Ring, it's not like Call of Cthulhu. I mean, because if you saw the movies, you know that they did win. But the point is that it came at a cost. Gandalf died. Yes, Eru Iluvatar, the god, intervened and brought him back. But he died. I mean, outside of, that was not like a given that like Gandalf was going to come back. I should point out that like in the lexicon, this is Tolkien nerd, in the lexicon of Lord of the Rings, Eru Iluvatar, the one, the sort of creator, the true and only creator deity in Tolkien's Legendarium, essentially an analog for God, really only ever did like 3 or 4 things in the entire history of the existence of Ea. And one of them was bringing back Gandalf. So that was kind of a big deal. And you could argue a massive plot armor point. But Gandalf dies. Boromir dies. Eowyn almost dies. Merry almost dies. Frodo basically in some ways does die. So there are prices and prices are paid and lives are lost and all this other stuff. So Theoden dies. So Denethor dies. He's not as evil in the books as he is in the movie. In the books, he is more just like, he is aware that they can't beat Mordor, and they can't. If anything, I kind of feel bad for Sauron sometimes because like he really should have won. I mean, he was outnumbering them by like 10. Like even after the siege of Gondor, and they won that was like a scouting party of his forces. He only lost because of the courage of Frodo and Sam, and technically because of the vile treachery of Gollum. Anyways, I don't remember where I was going off on this rant. My point is that in the context of the game, I think it's important at all points to sort of realize that this is not a superhero fantasy. It is not about, it's not fucking Deep Rock Galactic, the Tolkien edition, right? It's not like heavy rock music playing, a bunch of dwarven, like Warhammer style dwarves come, kicking through like a brick, kicking through a rock wall, and they're like glittering with like World of Warcraft style armor, and they're like swinging their mega double chain axes, and they're just like carving through thousands of orcs. That is definitely not this game. So, to the point where, a single shot, even in this game, a single arrow from an orc, from a goblin, could roll has a 1 in 12 chance. No, a 2 in 12 chance of doing a piercing blow. So 1 in 6, right? If you roll a 10 or the Eye of Sauron, basically if you're a bad guy. If you roll a 10 or the Eye of Sauron on an attack roll, so 2 out of 12 results, 1 in 6, it is a piercing blow, which means that it has struck you. And then you have to make an armor roll. And unless you're wearing really good armor, chances are pretty good that you might fail that armor roll, and then there's a chance that you just die. So it's not a game that, your characters aren't like fragile, but they're definitely not invincible or whatever in that respect. Nate says that sounds sick. To be clear, Nate, that does sound sick. Just maybe not for this game and what this game is going for. Because when I describe that situation, dwarves kicking through, that is not a game that I want to be tracking my dwarves' exposure to shadow and hope and dealing with their character, feeling the weight and the misery and the weariness from the dark that they have had to battle and face. There's this old D&D lineage, or not lineage. There's this old D&D legacy question, which is, are paladins brave? And the reason that question is interesting is because in most versions of D&D, by like level 1 or 2 or 3 or something like that, paladins are immune to fear. So can you be brave? Is bravery the absence of fear? Or is bravery being afraid and doing it anyways? So I would argue that Tolkien is kind of the latter, right? Your hero is flawed, is vulnerable, is weak and susceptible, right? But by holding true to your beliefs, to each other, to the moral goodness that is in your heart, that you can, overcome. And even if it does end up costing you your life, or to that end, you can still achieve a matter of victory. It's the struggle, right? That's important. It's true. In Pathfinder 2, fighters had the bravery class feature. Although that didn't make them immune to fear. It just made them less susceptible to fear, I guess. I'm trying to think. In Pathfinder 2, were paladins immune to fear? Or champions, I should say. Is that a feat that they probably had to take? I'm sure it's a feat that they had to take. I'm sure you can't just be immune to fear. That would be too powerful. All right, here we go. Aura of Courage. Whenever you become frightened, reduce the condition by 1. Well, that's right. So that's the question. Insight. Is there a difference? Because let's say that 2 people go up and give a speech, like a public speech, and one person, and they both do a great job, and one person is totally comfortable giving the speech. Now, by the way, to the outside observer, there's no difference. But one of those people is very comfortable, and they're very comfortable, doing the speech. The other person is terrified of doing the speech, but they do it anyways. Now, the external results are the same, but does that mean that was there a difference in the moral quality of those 2 actions? I don't know. I'm not saying I have an answer, by the way. It's a complicated question, right? Like, if you feel good and it brings joy to your heart to make sacrifices for others, is it really a sacrifice? Or are you doing it for your own selfish ends of feeling good and joy and doing good things and and doing selfless things for other people? So, put another way, would we consider like an android like Data, right, who has no emotions and can't feel fear? Do we consider him brave? I don't know. Anyways, I think this will be really cool. Again, I'm still traveling for the rest of this month, so but when I get back, at the end of the month, I'm hoping to kind of get this rolled out and deployed pretty ASAP, so that we can have something else to do. Because again, I want to do this alongside me playing in the same game, right? Where maybe twice a month or something like that, I would run a solo stream game, and do it live stream and have people from chat and stuff like that weigh in and do polls and stuff like that. But what I'm doing is going to be influenced and will influence the mega game, and maybe that to give it a little bit more intensity, maybe the stuff that happens in the live stream games, it is me, it is my game, it is my channel. Maybe my stuff has a little bit more weight, than maybe, the other people who are running, who are playing 2 or 3, 4 times a week, since I'm only playing a couple times a month, and it's got more public facing. So I'm hoping, fingers crossed, that kind of publicity might also bring in some new people and new players to get some new blood in, and to really, create this a really cool create this really cool experience for people, because there's certainly a threshold. Once you get to 20, 30 people who are fairly regularly active, these community games really become really cool and really create this really neat fun story sharing, creating process. So, anyways, yeah. So that's it. That's I just I wasn't going to stream tonight, but I decided to anyways because Tunnelist didn't end up streaming, and why not? And unfortunately, there is no gaming in my future, even though I'm going to GaryCon. I'm working, so I don't actually know if I'm going to be doing any gaming. Yeah, Steven keeps promising me when we go to these conventions, he's like, oh, it's going to be so great. After hours, everybody just, hangs out and games. And my experience, as soon as the con hall is closed, everybody is exhausted and wants to go eat and then go to bed, including me. So even though I've been to like 17 conventions in the last, 24 months, I feel like I've gamed almost none, which is a bummer. It is a bummer, but I'm just exhausted, like I'm tired. Everyone else is tired, and it's a hard place to be. Also, the kind of gaming I want to do is, it's not always on tap. So I don't know. It'll be my first time at GaryCon, so I am looking forward to that. But I leave Tuesday, so we may not. The next time I stream might be from Lake Geneva. So we'll see. If the weather's not too bad, there's a part of me that wants to do a live stream from out in front of where Gary Gygax's house is. We'll see. I don't know if it's in my schedule. I don't know if I can make it happen, but I definitely want to go over there, right, to where Gary essentially in his basement, typed up the first draft that would become D&D. And when people used to come over to Gary's house and go into his basement and play in the dungeons of Castle Greyhawk, it would be really cool. I definitely want to visit it, and if the weather's not too bad, I might even do a live stream from outside Gary's house in Lake Geneva, Wisconsin, which I think would be pretty sweet. So, okay, cool. Well, thanks for hanging out for me. This very little short stream here. Hopefully, if this is interesting to you, leave a comment below, or especially if you're not a member of our Patreon, maybe consider signing up to just be more aware of it, so that when we get this thing going, you can maybe be a part of it. And yeah, I'm looking forward to it. Cineboss, I don't know. Everything's fucked up, and who the hell knows? But it's a 90-minute flight from here to Chicago, so it's not that bad. Where is the game going to be played? Well, Patrick, all of our mega games are played through our Discord and through Foundry. And the Foundry is played through our Forge servers, so that is where everything is played. Obviously, the solo games we'll probably do through Discord, through our rolling bot, just so that you can just, create a forum post for your mission and just, roll some dice. And maybe I'll work with, we've created some bots before, some custom table bots, just to create some of the solo tools and to put them into the Discord so you can just access that. Yes, that is true, Omen. 90-minute. Well, it's worse than that, Omen, because Lake Geneva is an hour or more outside of Chicago. So actually, it's like 2 to 3 hours to get onto the plane. Then it's a 90-minute flight to Chicago. Then it'll probably take me, whatever, half an hour or more to get a car. I'm probably gonna have to get a rental car. It's probably too far to Uber. Then I'm gonna have to drive to Lake Geneva, and then, then the process begins. And then repeat it, and in reverse, 4 days later or 5 days later. So, unfortunate. But because I'm going to be out next week traveling, and that can always affect with the streams. Maybe I'll stream on Sunday or something like that if I'm feeling antsy and feeling a little bored. So, but I'd love to talk to you guys. If you are a member of the Patreon, we do have a public channel in KOLC content called Conquest of Moria. And you are more than welcome to hop over there and share some of your thoughts and ideas. Again, I don't want to overcomplicate this because the game's already pretty well situated, and they did a lot of heavy lifting for us. And normally my inclination is to really fuck things up and make my own thing and make it way more complicated than it needs to be, and then design a bunch of stuff and create a bunch of rules. I'm trying to avoid that as much as possible. One, because I really do like these rules, and two, I just kind of wanted to just, you know, to get started and get play. So, so yeah, I think that's about it. Does anybody have any other comments? I mean, I'm here. It's 1 a.m. Anybody else have any other things that they want to ask or talk about? It doesn't have to be about Moria or anything like that. We can talk about StarCraft miniature game. We can talk about D&D 5.5. I don't give a shit. We can talk about Nimble doing $1 million. What up? Congrats on Evan. Updates on the pirate game. So the update is I met with Smith. I got him on board. I shared my vision with him, and he thought it sounded really, really cool. We think that this is a good mix of things that we're interested in, but we're not in love with. Right? It's it's a girl that we want to date, but not a girl that we want to marry. Right? I mean, I will freely admit I'm not like a super huge mega pirate fan. I'm also not a super huge mega Shadowdark fan. However, I love sailing. I love boats. I love Pirates of Darkwater Saturday morning cartoon show. I love Treasure Planet. I love Master and Commander. I love the first Pirates of the Caribbean movie. So our inspiration is that, people seem to like pirates, people seem to like Shadowdark, and we understand that we don't want to reinvent the wheel for our first game. Secondly, my intention is to work with Roll for Combat and rely on their experience, and I've talked to Steven about this, and both from a publishing perspective as well as from like just a logistics perspective. And they also themselves are currently kind of in a Shadowdark kick. They're going to be doing Deathbringer for Professor Dungeon Master. They just did 3 Best Furies. They converted their 3 Best Furies into Shadowdark Best Furies. So they're going to have a lot of Shadowdark stuff at their booth. And quite frankly, I think it'd be pretty cool if we could make our own version of a Shadowdark type game and add it to the wares. And and I think that'd be really neat. So now, I don't know anything about Sea of Thieves, but I think this is a really important takeaway. Our game, is not a pirate game, which is to say, it is a hero game. It is not grimdark. It is noble dark, which is to say that the heroes are, at the end of the day, the PCs, I should say, are heroes. They are not scum. They are not villainies. They're not what's the word? They're not privateers, right? Who are just doing it for money and for national pride. No, this is This is actually a high fantasy concept pirate game, which is to say that you are, saving the world. So it is tonally, it is different than a lot of the Shadowdark products that are out there, and also tonally, no, it is nothing like Traveler. Yeah, it's nothing like Traveler. So it's quite different from Traveler. It is so it's not grimdark like a lot of OSR games. It is about tonally like Traveler at Sea. No, because Traveler isn't about being heroic. Traveler isn't about trying to save the universe. Traveler isn't about you're the chosen one, the destined one who will defeat the great evil. Traveler is much more shades of gray, rooted in simulationism, and I mean, yes, maybe the chosen one to pay off your mortgage. So it's my primary inspiration for it is the Saturday morning cartoon show Pirates of Darkwater, which was a show I absolutely loved. It kind of made me fall in love with sailing, and it was a great cartoon show. And it was kind of like Firefly of its time. In that it ended too soon, but it had this really crazy budget and this really crazy following. But I mean, One Piece is another game that I think some people show. Now, obviously, One Piece is a little bit more wonky and bizarro, but there's this idea that they are kind of the good guys trying to do the right thing, right? So they're not the bad guys, nor are they just like pirates, but with like a legal letter of marque. It's not like that. So I shared my design ideas with Smith, and we kind of agreed on some different principles. And I said, well, look, I'm traveling in March. And he said, okay, well, I will take a first crack pass at the game. He's got different financial obligations than me. So he's got a family and stuff. So he doesn't have months and months and months to waste on this. So Smith is going to basically crack at it really hard for March, and then try to drop off a sort of first pass design doc, development doc, and we'll iterate from there a little bit, and then try to get it into the patrons' hands for alpha playtesting. To sauce out the rules. Obviously, one of the reasons why we picked Shadow Dark, aside from its popularity, is quite frankly because it puts a limitation on us. It is a natural tendency for me and Smith to want to overcomplicate things and create lots of complicated subsystems and subsystems within subsystems. And not only does that take a lot of time, but historically, given the popularity of certain Kickstarters, that doesn't tend to be the most popular thing either. So there's because there's a lot of moving parts here. Obviously, one of the reasons that we want to make a game is because we feel like we have a cool idea that we want to share with the community. But also, it's a great way for us to get experience designing a game and to maybe put some money in our pockets, which is an important thing for me now that I am a professional content creator. But to share a contrast with Pirate Borg, this is just me. Pirate Borg has what I feel are very complicated, dare I even say, simulationist naval war game like ship rules. We do not want ship rules like Pirate Borg's ship rules, where you're tracking direction and heading and wind direction, and your ship can only make a 60-degree turn, and you've got this big hex map, and your ship is on 2 hexes, and you're making these turns, and that's cool, by the way. I think that's really neat. That for me, tonally, isn't what I want out of our version of a game. I want something that's a little bit more Saturday morning cartoon show, a little bit more swashbuckler, a little bit more, fast and adventuresome than something that's just this like literal simulationist recreation of naval combat in the Age of Sail, with gaining the windward advantage and I never played Sid Meier's Pirates, but now that being said, we also don't want to ignore boats, because boats are cool. I like boats. I like sailing, and so it's about finding sort of a sweet spot in the design principle. The other thing is I want to create. So that's goal number one. Goal number one is, can I make an OSR game that isn't grimdark and isn't like, I get it, some people like them, but it isn't all like the terrible tropes of OSR that have become so just like fantasy fucking Vietnam, and everybody's morally gray, and everybody is a Frank Frazetta cover art, and everybody is like all this stuff, right? So none of that. So that's my first objective. Can I create a game that is instead of grimdark is noble dark, and has a more positive kind of spin, at least on your characters, and it doesn't make you just the scum of the earth, right? To make your character more like a Will Turner or an Elizabeth Swann, at least movie number 1, Elizabeth Swann and Will Turner, not Captain Barbossa and crew. So that's number 1. Number 2, that's the first one. Number 2, one of the things that I want to encourage is, and I think Dolman Wood did a great job with this, is I want to give people the tools that they need to actually run a campaign and not just run endless one-shots. I feel like a lot of people are running Shadowdark essentially as a series of one-shots. And they don't really treat the game seriously, and they kind of just, play it, and it's all for lulz and fun and and throwing your characters into a wood chipper. And I think it'd be cool to actually create a campaign. But I don't want some sort of grindy simulationist sandbox, but I don't want an adventure path as well. So part of the campaign structure is this idea of creating a framework, very inspired by Daggerheart, that basically creates a campaign framework that basically says, here's the world, here is this existential threat, the Shadow Tide, and here's what you need to do to beat it. Now, is there an order that you need to do? No. You can go in whatever order you want. Is there things that have to happen? No. Right? You could go left, you could go right. There's no, you don't have to get this treasure before this treasure, get this treasure. But if you get the 10 MacGuffins or the 13 MacGuffins or whatever it is, you will have won the campaign. Right? I want to create a campaign setting that quite literally has a winning condition. And that doesn't mean that you will win, and it doesn't mean that you have to win. And it certainly isn't an adventure path. It's going to ideally create a framework that gives the GMs the tools that they need to kind of essentially seed the world with the relics and put them into interesting places that we can provide. Cool islands, neat little adventure sites. Not necessarily full dungeons, but if you're familiar with a lot of Free League stuff from Dragonbane and your Zero Engine, that you know what an adventure site looks like. And this is kind of the same concept, by the way, that the what's it called? It's not called the Blood Mist. What's it called? The Ravens. What's it called? Raven's Purge. That's the name of the first campaign setting. Now, I'm very much inspired by this. This is not an adventure path, nor is it just a campaign setting. It's again, it's like a campaign framework that has these factions and events and tools, and it basically says, like, here's how you can put these together, but you can choose where this particular thing is if you want to put it into your campaign. Give you those tools as a GM. So that's the other part. So in theory, we want to create a 2-book set, just like Dolmen Wood or Land of Eam, where you would sort of have the Shadow Tide, the rule book, and then Shadow Tide, the kind of campaign framework or campaign book. And you could just use the Shadow Tide player book or rule book to run a campaign, maybe steal some of the rules and just play a normal Shadowdark campaign, I suppose. But there's going to be some slight overlap. And again, if you watched our Land of Eames with the Mucklin settings, or if you watched our Dolmen Wood pair of streams, you can see that while the core books theoretically are, generic and universal, there was a lot of tie-in. It wasn't so much that you literally had to use this campaign or the game wouldn't work. But yeah, it was those both of those, Dolmen Wood and Land of Eam, were both big inspirations for me about it. I was like, this is how I want this to feel. Do you plan on going with canon Age of Sail or more like Sinbad era? More like magical fantasy Saturday morning cartoon show pirates. So yes, canons, but not really Age of Sail nor like Sinbad era either. It's not a simulationist, attempt to replicate any sort of particular era or style or genre. That being said, even though I am not, as big of a fan of the Age of Sail, it is probably, there's probably definitely going to be canon. I'll say that. Yeah, cool for me. Yeah, I think it's neat. I'm inspired. The main inspiration, I've said this before, but the main inspiration for that is this game, Band of Blades. And in Band of Blades, you are a army that you've lost. The game starts with your army has lost the war, and you are doing essentially a series of retreats to fall back to Skydagger Keep, where the final battle will be fought. And at the end of the campaign, you then check your victory points, and the GM tells you whether you lost or whether you won the campaign or not. Like there's literally at the end of the campaign, there's literally a final scoring. Now I don't know if we're going to get that specific, but that was a big inspiration for me as well as Band of Blades and the sort of winning condition. Smith was also inspired by this when he did his Dark of Winter for our Pathfinder 2 campaign. He was the same thing. He was inspired by Band of Blades. Edward says, we spent 2 years in Raven's Purge, and we still felt like we had another 2 years of Strings to explore. Love how that one is designed. Love it. I'm right there with you, Edward. I think Raven's Purge is awesome. And then, of course, there's Bitter Reach, and then, of course, there's the Blood March. And just like, I mean, you could play for like 7 years with just these 3 campaigns settings. And again, they're not settings, but they're not adventures. If you haven't read these books, it's kind of difficult to explain what they are, but I mean, they're kind of it's like a grab bag of ideas and factions and key NPCs and motivations and cool locations. And it basically says, kind of take these cool NPCs and take these cool events and take these cool locations and seed them into this campaign setting, which is kind of detailed, but also kind of not, and leaves a ton of room for you. It's very draw maps, leave blanks, for you to create a bunch of stuff. Not every hex is detailed. So in this way, it's very much not like Dolmenwood, where literally every hex is detailed. But Thundercats, no. Well, Pirates of Darkwater would be a much more accurate Saturday morning cartoon. Yes, Pirates of Darkwater would be a much more accurate Saturday morning cartoon. Another Saturday night cartoon that I would also be inspired by is Jace and the Wheeled Warriors. Now, this one was set in space, but they sailed around on a space sailing ship, and they would get into a series of adventures while trying to, you guessed it, solve the MacGuffin so that they could join the mysterious parts of the pieces of root, and that would give them the power to defeat the villainous Saw Boss. So can I get a ship that can eat other ships or nah? I don't think so. I don't know that is something that I'm particularly aware of. I don't know that I have an area like that. I mean, if we're talking about as the players, or are you talking about like the what's it called? The Maelstrom, I think is the name of it. You're talking about the what's his name? Bloth. You're talking about Bloth ship. I mean, the big bad guy ship could potentially be a direct ripoff of the Maelstrom. I had to look up the name of it. It is the Maelstrom. But would the players have that? Probably not. I will say that, like a Saturday morning cartoon show, like Ninja Turtles or Thundercats, right, or He-Man, one of the things that I really want to do in this game is for you to have a main villain, right? And this is not a villain that you just kill the first time that you meet him. It's a Dr. Claw, it's a Mum-Ra, it's a Skeletor, it's a Saw Boss, it's a Captain Bloth, right? It's a, I'll get you next time, Gadget. I want there to be that kind of reoccurring villain that, you are basically dealing with throughout the entire course of the campaign.
Fermi Dirac tipped $5. StarCraft minigame plus pirate setting equals treasure planet with Zerg next.
Well, StarCraft minigame, thank you, by the way, for the tip. We're now at 105. That's just because I think I love StarCraft, and I love miniatures games, and I don't know about mixing that with the Zerg, but I would love it. Nate, that's a cool idea. But thank you, Fermi. I appreciate you, and I'm also excited, Fermi, that that you're digging what we're talking about here. And I love that you had a similar idea for your campaign frame. That always makes me feel better that I'm kind of on the same thing. So Nate said, Omanal, have a good night. Omanal says session 0 villain design. That's a great question. I don't know how much. I don't know how much narrative elements I want to put into this game because it is Shadowdark. And I have to keep reminding myself of that. You know, one of the reasons that I picked Shadowdark is because I knew it would constrain me from doing the kind of shit that I like to do, which inevitably would spell the disaster of any successful game. You know, between me and you, now, does this game need to do $1 million? No. Does this game need to do $500,000? No. Do I need this game to put, $20,000, $30,000 into my pocket? Probably, because if I don't, then my life situation has to change, and I might have to, go to work, and that could really change the way that this whole channel plays out. The reason that this channel even exists is you have to remember when this channel started, I wasn't working. My photography business was basically dead. I was just living off of fumes. When I started working, I was working for a very lenient company. I worked remotely from home. I had very, very, very light workloads. I was able to get most of my work done very quickly because my bosses didn't really understand what I was capable of or even what I was doing. And that gave me a lot of time to focus on this game. If my situation changes and I need to go get, a horrible corporate job, again, like when I worked for Progressive, that would really change the tone of this whole channel and the direction of it. So all that's to say, one of the reasons I picked Shadowdark is to sort of control. And Smith, I met with him today, and my buddy George, and he was even confirming that today that he appreciates that it limits our design somewhat. So I don't know how much. Believe it or not, I don't know how much, ask the players and collaborate with them type energy I want, because I don't know that is what I feel like. Again, there's a, it's like black and white art with Shadowdark. I'm creating. I don't want to create a grimdark game. I want to create a noble, bright game. Or sorry, noble, dark game, right? Where the heroes are sort of rising up, and they're Saturday morning cartoon characters. Does that mean that all my art should be, black and white and, grimdark or grim death? Does that mean I should have Frank Frazetta covers with girls with big, breasts and guys with rippling 12 packs? Probably not. Titan AE is really good too. I think Titan AE is very like Treasure Planet coded. So, anyways, will this be a mega game? That I don't know. But I will say that we are going to definitely do the alpha playtest with the patrons. So if you're a patron of Night's Last Call, that's once we sort of get through the initial design and we get sort of a framework for alpha, could it be a mega game to playtest it? Possibly. I don't know if that is the best way to do it. I mean, because to be clear, the rules are pretty much going to. We're not trying to deviate too much from Shadowdark, and the rules of Shadowdark are 6 stats, advantage, disadvantage, D20 plus a modifier versus a DC. You may know this game already, but so that I'm already aware that D20 plus modifier versus a DC. I'm already aware that system works pretty well, and has been working for a long time. What we're more interested in checking is some of the rules that we develop for the journey, the naval journeys, which I'm very much inspired by the journey rules from the One Ring. Some of the ship battle rules, stuff like that. So those are the things that we're really going to try to lay down. And then the classes, again, Shadowdark classes are pretty limited. So there's a question of how much do we want to push that limit? I don't think I want to create 4 or 5 page classes for Shadow Dark, but at the same time, Shadow Dark classes are about 300 characters long, so they're very, very basic. So I don't know if there's a, so I think we're going to probably, maybe play test the, to make sure the classes and the races they feel right. Again, balance isn't really a concern as much, but anyways, so that's where we're at with Shadowtide. Pirates of Shadowtide, the Shadowtiders, whatever. And then also, as we move, and so the initial alpha is really going to be about locking down the rules. But when it comes time to actually fill out the book, look, I'm not trying to reinvent the wheel here. If you look at most of these OSR books, half of the pages are just filled with random tables. So that's where our patrons and stuff, could definitely be asked to help contribute and maybe add add some elements to, we're creating a random table of, I don't know, pirate paraphernalia or something like that. It'd be pretty cool to see what the patrons can come up with. And then in terms of the campaign book, we may figure out a way to have certain people, create some really neat. People who are more inclined to create stuff might be apt to create an adventure location or create an island, and get to have your get your name in the book, right? So obviously that's a step up, but yeah, pretty cool. No, we're trying to avoid hex crawls or ship crawls, I guess would be the term, for 2 reasons, Patrick. Number 1, KOLC Western Reaches is coming out. If you want to do Shadow Dark and you want to do hex crawling, Western Reaches is out, and I'm not trying to fucking ice skate up that hill. Secondly, I feel like core Shadow Dark is really good at dungeons. Now, does that mean that your characters aren't still going to go into cool locations? Of course you are, but I don't intend for them to be what I would call a dungeon. Again, the inspiration for me for a dungeon is very much the adventure sites from places like Forbidden Lands, or Dragonbane. So when you look at an adventure location in Forbidden Lands, it might be something like that. It's not a mega dungeon. It's I don't know, a 6 or 7 area dungeon. So yeah, you might journey to the Siren's Teeth, and there you enter into the Tower of the Pearl Hand, and we have it's a dungeon. You're going inside of it, but it's not like a dungeon crawl. It's a dungeon adventure. So. Well, the game only has, everybody else so far has just created new classes. Even Shadow Dark has just created new classes. Deathbringer's creating new classes. Titanfall is creating new classes. I think everybody just creates new classes. It doesn't really make sense to do advanced classes in a game that's super rules light and only 10 levels long. So, I'm not going to touch the existing classes at all. If you want to be a fighter or whatever, you can just be a fighter from the core book. We're probably going to create 4 to 6 new classes, give or take. We'll see what if we think that there's a play space for it, and there's enough of a carve out or enough of a differentiation that we can kind of figure that out. And then I think play testing will also kind of suss that out as well. Cool. Any other questions? No? All right, cool. Well, if you do have any other questions, I will at some point, not yet, but I will eventually create a Shadowtide channel in our Knights of the Last Call. There's a Project Shadow Deep, which is kind of on hold until we can, make it something that we can actually complete and make money on. Creating an 11-level mega dungeon. A lot of work. But maybe someday, who knows? Maybe I'll become the Shadow Dark guy. I don't know. But it's it's fun to really focus. I'm a very gamey gamist, and so it's neat to, and Smith's very gamey gamies, and he loves his MMOs and stuff like that. So it's neat for us to just kind of focus on that raw distilled form and try to be minimalist in our approach to create a fun experience. So, and the key will be, did we get that? Did we get enough juice with our squeeze? Do we need to squeeze a little bit more? Do we need to squeeze a little bit less? Is there enough juice for what we're squeezing for? I mean, my thing would always be like, I want more juice. But again, that's going to come at a cost of complexity and complication. And I don't want to create lists of feats, and I don't want to create really weird, bespoke, infinitely depth, complicated mechanics with lots of subtables and all this other stuff, So that'll do it for me. Thank you, everybody, for joining me tonight on this kind of impromptu stream where we talked about one of the cool ideas for Moria. Because again, at the end of the day, I mean, I'm creating a game. But ultimately, the reason I would make a game is because I want people to play games. And that's why I like mega games. That's why I want to do Moria. I like this game, The One Ring. I'm going to be playing it with the live stream. I may even create a new Patreon ticketed game like we've done in the past with Torchbearer, and Bob has done with Dragonbane, with Dragon Emperor, and Path of Glory, where we allow patrons to use their tickets to get a seat at the table, because I think The One Ring is a really awesome game. It's beautiful. It's everything that I could aspire to create in a game. And they had a little bit of a leg up because it's kind of based on this guy named Tolkien, so they did have an advantage, I suppose. In any case, I look forward to talking to you more about this in the coming weeks and months, and hopefully we'll see you on the Patreon, patreon.com/knights-of-last-call, link in the doobly-doo down below. Come join us, be part of the fun, and maybe part of the conversations as we sort of go down both of these paths. I mean, I think for me, 2026 is going to be getting some of these cool mega games launched, and trying to build up community and hype that way. Working on this Pirates of Shadowtide game and doing it that way, and then of course continuing to do live streams focusing on first looks and GMing advice, and hopefully, maybe, fingers crossed, something for Daggerheart celebrating the 1-year anniversary. Potentially, maybe even doing an actual play in this whole bedroom studio that I built just to play Daggerheart in, and we didn't get to do it. So maybe 1 year out, we'll finally get to do it. So I look forward to that as well, because I think that game's awesome too. All right, everybody, thank you so much for joining me, and I will catch you next time on Knights of Last Call. Good night, everybody. Peace.